Hello and welcome back to Trade Talks. My name is Leanne Alfaro. I'm a producer and host here at Nasdaq, and joining me today is Brad Longcar, CEO of Longcar Investments. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure having you. So today we're talking biotech outlook and trends, and I hear you're here for an immune oncology conference. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
That's right, just a couple blocks away here in Times Square. I'm at a conference called Immuno Oncology 360. And immuno-oncology is using the immune system to treat cancer. Another term for that is cancer immunotherapy. And it's one of the new ways of treating cancer that's really having a big impact on many types like melanoma, lung cancer, bladder cancer, and others. And the first round of these drugs are on the market today and helping patients today. And we're at a conference like this to learn what version 2 and version 3 of these drugs will be like so that more patients can benefit from them in more different types of cancers.
So how are companies today then using the immune system to treat cancer?
Well, one thing that's very important for people to know is that immuno-oncology or cancer immunotherapy is not one thing. There's many different approaches to it. So the first kind that kind of worked, the layman's term that we like to say is it's like taking the brakes off of the immune system. You know, people have always wondered, literally for 100 years, why doesn't the immune system naturally recognize cancer as foreign like it does a virus? And one reason it doesn't is because there's a protein on the outside of cells and cancer cells that kind of acts as a stop sign. And so companies and researchers now are able to take the brakes off like that, but that's only one kind. Another thing that's very popular right now is what's called cellular immunotherapies. Companies are able to use a patient's own cells as the treatment. They take them outside of the body and re-engineer them so that they can better see cancer and infuse them back in the patient. And that's working very well in types of blood cancers. And there's dozens and dozens of other approaches like that. There's something called bispecific antibodies that's really hot right now. An antibody is like a Y, and one arm recognizes a marker on the outside of the cancer cell, and one arm recognizes a marker on the immune cell and triggers that immune cell in the area of the cancer. So there's a lot of exciting approaches. They all will work for different types of cancers, and we're trying to sort that out right now.
Very important work you're working on. And so where do you see the future of immunotherapy headed?
Well, I think those bispecific antibodies will be very hot this year. There's a big blood cancer conference called ASH at the end of December where we saw the first hints of that, the first clinical data. And I think we'll see a lot more of that throughout the year this year. Those cell therapies, a couple are already on the market today, but they're very personalized. You have to use the patient's own cells. And for those to be used very widely from a commercial standpoint, we need to get to what's called an allogeneic approach, which is using cells from donors that are already made so that you don't have to use the patient's own cells. I think we're 2 or 3 years away from that technology working and making it to the market, but it's something that people are making a lot of progress on right now. And those are really the main areas. And then the other thing is using existing take the brakes off type drugs that are called checkpoint inhibitors and combining them with other types of drugs like chemotherapies and other types of immunotherapies to see if 2 drugs together are better than one. So there's a lot of work in that area right now as well.
Wow. And looking into 2019, what do you see in store for the biotech sector?
Well, this is an interesting year. You know, we're just kind of in the middle of earnings season right now. And there's really 2 segments in biotech. The large companies, like the large pharmaceutical companies and the large biotech companies, almost across the board, their earnings have actually been very mediocre this year. And the reason for that is a lot of them rely on what we call legacy products, so drugs that have been around for many years for their revenue. And everything that you see in the news today about, you know, drug pricing and payers pushing back, that's really affecting these companies and starting to affect their bottom line. And I think that's a good thing. This industry needs to get back to basics and really develop new medicines that matter for patients. So by and large, those large companies have had some troubles. And it's really the mid-cap and the small-cap biotech companies that are really doing most of the innovation today. So I think those companies, you know, many that are listed here on the Nasdaq, are in a great position because they have all these new technologies that these larger companies need. We've already seen some M&A this year, and hopefully we'll see a lot more as those larger companies kind of restock their own pipelines and get back to innovating, they need to get the technologies from these smaller companies to do that.
And those are absolutely really interesting times and fascinating developments to see that disruption and innovation happen. And then as for China and immunotherapies trends and biotech trends happening there, what do you see? What kind of movement do you see happening?
Yeah, so I've been focusing on China a lot over the last couple of years. I think it's one of the most exciting things happening in our industry right now. And I compare it to what our biotech sector was in the 80s and 90s. Like, their biotech sector is just getting started. Before these last few years, their drug industry was mostly focused on generic medicines. And they want the same cutting edge drugs that we have today for their families like we have for ours. And so they're starting to really focus on innovation in a big way. And it's just like our biotech sector in the 80s and 90s. You know, there's a Genentech there, there's an Amgen there, there's a Celgene there, and they're just going public. Many are listing here, right here at the Nasdaq, and they're really focusing on innovation in a big way. And also there's important reforms that are happening there. Their version of the FDA is called the National Medical Products Administration, and they've made a lot of important changes. A lot of entrepreneurs who had experience in our biotech sector are returning home and starting these companies that are really doing first-class, cutting-edge science. And so, you know, biotech is very rocky. When ours started, you know, Genentech was the very first biotech IPO in 1980, and people didn't know what to make of it. And there's a little bit of that going on there right now, but I think all of the arrows are pointed in the right direction. And I think they're going to have a very interesting and very credible biotech sector here in the coming years. So it's something, I think, to put on every biotech investor's radar.
Certainly something to keep an eye on. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time, and we'll hope to have you back here soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Nasdaq followers, that had been Brad Long.